Well, hi everyone. Today we're going to look at a particular topic which concerns us as we have, over the years in the recent past where biodiversity conservation has been given utmost importance in relation to sustainability or sustainable development. So, what we will be doing is to sort of engage with the earlier works which has been carried out by some of the scholars who have worked extensively mostly in the Himalayas regions and trying to engage and look at what are the problems which are being encountered mostly by the people, the ecosystem, and to what extent the local knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge has been essential and important with regards to their relationship with biodiversity, and to what extent the local institutions or their knowledge system has in fact provided a sense of their concerns and the sustainable use of resources. So, if we looked at the primary issues which is being confronted to us. So, across the national level and the global level, one of the most critical issues which has been pushed forward, that is the main primary agenda, is in some sense the very urgent need to engage it in preserving biodiversity for our future generations. So, I am sure by now you all are familiar with what the Brundtland Commission or Brundtland report has highlighted in their report, that is our common future. That is perhaps one of the starting point where sustainability or sustainable development is being premised, and it deliberate upon how we as a human have to sustainably use the resources to fulfill our or meet our basic needs, and at the same time we should not really compromise with the future generations, that is in exploiting or exhausting the available resources. So, at this very critical junctures, and again it becomes important for us to look at what the local community or the indigenous peoples concerned or their traditional resource management practices are. So, the United Nations in one of their report recently, that is which gave a preliminary report warning that the global biodiversity is actually declining at an unprecedented rate, with approximately 1 million species currently at the risk of being extinct or extinction. However, the report noted that biodiversity is declining at a significantly slower rate at lands which are governed or which are inhabited by the indigenous peoples, which perhaps sort of tries to demonstrate their reports or stories of success as guardian or stewards of their natural environment. So, biodiversity describes genetic diversity within and between species and is integral to the health and resilience of an ecosystems. So, a decline in biodiversity will definitely have a negative impact on the human beings in a number of different ways, ranging from say food security to water quality. So, considering this development or fact, it is pretty much imperative for indigenous knowledge to play an integral role in the fight to protect the sacredness of our global world or the global biome. So, it is also presumed from many studies which have been conducted so far, and then research papers are being available, which sort of denotes that indigenous peoples across the globe have actually lived in harmony with their traditional lands for generations, living off the land and its resources while maintaining the integrity of the ecosystem itself. So, for indigenous peoples, sustainability is a necessity, for without which their own livelihood are actually being at risk. So, traditional ecological knowledge and practices have been so successful that although indigenous lands account for a very meager, for instance 22% of the world's land area, their traditional territories are home to approximately 80% of the world's biodiversity. So, this has actually led to a growing appreciation for the value of traditional ecological knowledge in promoting sustainable land management and scientific discovery, and in also catering to the environmental data to support such as the climate adaptation strategies. So, in our previous classes, when we talk about the climate change vis-a-vis mountain biodiversity and citing some examples of the Himalayan areas, we have actually discussed and highlight that there are a lot of biodiversity, including flora and fauna, which are being threatened as a consequence of climate change. So, now it is also increasingly felt that traditional ecological knowledge is being recognized as a complementary to modern science in supporting sustainable land and resource management. So, it is the product of the indigenous people's deep knowledge and understanding of their environment, which has evolved over many generations. So, therefore, traditional management practices such as the ritualized burning of vegetations to improve soil productivity are both culturally and ecologically important. So, despite a history of marginalizations or marginalizing indigenous groups, there are different countries which have actually tries to give utmost importance to the knowledge systems of these indigenous peoples. So, in some countries they also have a policy that indigenous peoples are actually being entrusted with the management and preservations of their lands. So, in addition to serving a key component of or such as biodiversity and so on and so forth. So, traditional ecological knowledge can actually unveil valuable information about the intricacies of environmental systems. So, by engaging or learning from centuries of careful observations and understanding the traditional practices of indigenous peoples, scientists can actually advance their understanding of the natural systems. For example, the indigenous farmers of the South Asian countries who are actually dwelling in the upland areas have a typical way of farming system, And at the same time, if you look at some of their religious belief and practices, it is evident that in their traditional, set of beliefs and practices are pretty much, environment friendly. At the same time, because they have, share an intricate and symbiotic relationship with nature, with regards to, the practice of rituals and so on and so forth. So one can actually take into considerations about the indigenous people's worldview. Now, as I had already pointed out, the indigenous knowledge and resource use practices has been actually defined as a body of knowledge and beliefs which are actually handed down through successive generations by cultural transmissions about the relationship of livings, which include human beings, with one another and also with other environment. Indigenous knowledge, therefore, is of pretty much crucial significance if one has to really, introduce a cost-effective and participatory as well as sustainable development process. Now, why is mountain biodiversity important and significant, and to what extent it has really catered to the sustainable well-being? So, mountain systems in the Himalayan regions and particularly in India, which is characterized by a complex socio-ecological system with rich cultural diversity linked with equally rich species or a biological diversity. So the Himalayan region is also, a home to many ethnic communities which have, different sets of beliefs and economic practices. So they really, rely or depend on their natural surroundings for the means of livelihood, and also in the process tends to shape their way of life, or in some sense enhances their lives and livelihoods and also well-being. So therefore, these ethnic communities who are, inhabiting the mountainous region, mostly in the whether it's the Western Himalayas, the Central Himalayas, or the Northeastern Himalayas. So they do have their own social, economic and cultural attributes which are placed in a highly heterogeneous mountain environment, and any conservation link developmental initiatives has to be actually based on the value system that they understand, at the same time appreciate, and therefore they can be an active participants. So on the other hand, the textbook knowledge which talks about or which claims to, take the perspective of this formal knowledge, has its value in this effort, that is the rich traditional ecological knowledge, that is TEK, which is derived through an experiential process and available with local communities from powerful connections with linking both the ecological and social systems. So we also have, ethnoecology, ethnoscience, ethnobotany, so on and so forth, which the concepts and terminology which have evolved over time by taking into considerations about the knowledge systems of these ethnic communities. So therefore, the traditional societies are those who represent or are in a very close to nature and the natural resources, and perceived to be, the custodians of these critically important natural based system. So over a successive period of time, and the most importantly the past few decades, many of these mountain regions, mostly the Himalayan areas, have actually witnessed a rapid degradations of land resources, and which are actually arising as a consequence of deforestations and also other associated depletions of biodiversity. So which eventually lead to desertifications of the landscape. So somewhere I have also talked about a cultural landscape where people share an intricate relationship with their land, and they also have their set of socio-cultural belief system which are being embedded in that particular geographical space or land. So in recent times, many of the developmental initiatives being undertaken are actually being pursued, which is based largely and which is largely centered around a textbook knowledge based approach with experimental models which are being created in the area of the mountain agriculture, agricultural development, or following traditional silvicultural ways of dealing with forestry. Now, in such initiatives or efforts which are being undertaken, community participations in the developmental efforts, that is pretty much critical when dealing with these traditional mountain societies, which actually often is being ignored and then not really taken as an active participants, and therefore such efforts have not been able to take or materialize. So if you look around wherever these community participations actually takes place or occur, it remains highly localized as part of the environmental activism, which in the absence of a firmly rooted socio-ecological system framework that is based on a rigorous analysis could not actually be replicated on larger regions. For instance, even the joint forest management, what has actually begun with a bottom-up approach towards conservations like sustainable livelihood for local communities, has actually become again a top-down with foresters calling the tune. That is, the authority actually lies elsewhere rather than concentrating on the local communities. So traditional ecological knowledge has to be properly analyzed and meaningful put into it, meanings put into that, so that generalizations that cut across socio-ecological systems could be arrived at to enable regional planning efforts. So one has to engage again in understanding the socio-ecological system, which is again arrived at through a detailed analysis of the knowledge systems. When we talk about knowledge systems, again it consists of two ways. One is the formal and one is the indigenous or the traditional knowledge. So the knowledge systems has opened up possibilities for towards finding a lasting replicable solutions to the problem of say the natural resource management in mostly in the mountain regions. So for instance, there is also if you look at the works of P.S. Ramakrishnan, which talks about the Himalayan tragedy, do highlight about the redevelopment of Jhum practices, such as the shifting agriculture, which is very much predominant in the northeast Himalayas, through an incremental pathway that is step by step building upon the traditional ecological knowledge system and or based available with the community, because this knowledge systems is very much embedded or embodied in the local community concerns. So, this could actually be possible through community participations. So, such kind of redevelopment of such farming or agriculture practices was initiated a few decades back, more importantly in northeastern hill region. So, a developmental initiative that could actually which was not actually possible since colonial period have actually being initiated. So, it remains to be seen that to what extent this will be fruitful, or the agendas, how these agendas will be pushed forward to what extent. So, therefore, there is also a renewed interest in the redevelop Jhum, that is in the northeastern hill region and elsewhere, as initiatives of or as a part of a cultural landscape, rather than an alternative to Jhum on a sectoral basis, and that too which is primarily based on formal knowledge based models in the backyard experimental garden, divorced from the local communities. So one can actually see that there is a different kind of initiative which are actually being taken by certain developmental policies and programs. So, if you look at the works of Singh, he has actually alluded to the fragility and vulnerability of the mountain ecosystems due to the uniqueness of the mountain societies or specificities. So, he further mentioned the significance of the socio-cultural systems without going into or socio-cultural systems perspectives, whilst dealing with sustainable mountain development, without giving into the specific details of taking them on board in research analysis. So, therefore, understanding these knowledge systems and linking the ecological processes with the social processes was seen as the key for linking developmental concerns with a value system that the local communities understand and appreciate, and therefore participate in the process of development, with the possibilities of local initiative which are being taken to a regional scale through general principles that could actually cut across the socio-ecological systems. So, one can actually see the way in which where initiatives has to be push, wherein the local communities can actually participate. So, if we look further about the uniqueness of these mountain communities, one can actually see that the traditional mountain societies are typically characterized by their close interconnection that they maintain with nature and natural resources. So, most often before the intrusions of market-based economy and state-led development policies and programs, many of the traditional communities have actually practices a subsistence economy, and whereby nature and natural resources, more importantly, are being utilized for their own basic or subsistence need. So one can actually see that the manner in which these resources are being exploited are minimal, and also have a lot of time and space for regeneration. Whereas with the inroads of market economy and state-led development initiatives, nature and for that matter natural resources are being seen from an instrumental point of view. So as I pointed out that the traditional societies actually depend upon the natural resources in general and the biodiversity around for their sustainable livelihood. So this relationship actually extends beyond the biophysical ecology and economic concerns. Social, cultural and spiritual dimensions also plays a significant role here. So therefore, they have a very broader worldview in terms of giving a space to every species or respect for other creation as well. So therefore, they have a holistic view of the ecosystems in relations to the social systems, which often results in agriculture strategies that are adapted to the natural environment and sustainable use of natural resources. So at this point, we also are familiar to a large extent that how these traditional societies have managed and also depend on the natural resources, and to what extent they have been not a mere exploiters of resources, but also at the same time as a custodians of these natural resources. So the objectives of these concerns and of primarily the traditional societies being they have been abided by these principles of sustainable use of natural resources, that is to cope with uncertainties in the environment rather than the short term strategy to maximize production. Now, by saying so, we also need to be informed that many of these traditional societies or people who are close to living to the nature and natural resources have evolved considerably over a period of time, and as I pointed out that the intrusions of the market economy and state-led development agendas which are being pushed to many of these communities have actually been a havoc to them, and their social, cultural, economic practices have changed. So there is a transition in terms of not just their economic practices, but also their worldview and their sense of principles and values towards nature also have changed over a period of time. So one can actually say that traditionally many of these communities their main motive or ultimate objective has always been geared to sustainable use of natural resources through compromises between environmental risk and productivity concerned. So given their economic practices, towards the natural resources, it has always been guided by these principles of a long term or a very sustainable way of managing resources. Long term because it also cater to the sense of food security when any kinds of calamities befall. So the cropping patterns are also such that they use, they selectively plant crops that would in some way be kept for a longer duration of period, and in that sense it provides and caters to the food security of the community. Now, if we look further about the knowledge systems, the formal knowledge again is derived from a hypothetical deductive process which arises from biophysical understanding of ecosystem dynamicity both in space and time, and their structural and functional attributes have been well studied and elaborated over a period of time. So this knowledge base has been widely used to address a whole range of ecosystem management related issues, and has often worked as pretty well in the context of the industrialized world, where vast majority of the people and are now dealing from nature, or we could say that there is the binary is being created between human and nature. So this Western scientific knowledge, or for that matter the former knowledge, in some sense has created boundaries or has placed human as a superior being when compared with other creation. So however, such an approach is seen to be deficient in addressing when it is concerned to resilience as an adaptive capacity of socio-ecological systems under a variety of situations, particularly so in the context of dealing with traditional mountain societies that we have in India. So at one point elsewhere, I have also mentioned in my previous lectures that these traditional knowledge systems in some way have an adaptive and coping mechanism under any kind of changes. However, with the frequent alterations in terms of the changes of weather, climate, and then certain other things, so the climatic changes have in some sense impair or derail the knowledge systems of these communities, and thereby they are in some way in a very fixed and helpless situations over the past few decades. So one can actually see the fragility and the vulnerability of the mountainous communities in recent times. Now, how does this ecosystem processes are actually being altered by societal perceptions and decision making processes? In other words, how does the social ecological system function as an integrated whole both in space and time, and what are the implications for sustainability science? So when we talk about science, we normally presume that it is largely based on the Western notions of knowledge system. But as time and again I have mentioned about Levi-Strauss, the Savage Mind, where he always compare and tries to look at the way in which how knowledge system functions across different societies, where in the primitive societies, and also where we presume to be the modern society. So it is only that the way in which this knowledge are being applied is different, but there is a presence of knowledge systems in both or different societies. So in recent times, what happens is that the ecologists have actually started giving attention or looking at the dynamics of this relationship, which is operating at a varied spatial, that is with regards to the species, ecosystems and landscape, and also the temporal scales. So the traditional ecological knowledge, which is generated by the community through and experiential processes, that is based on the trial and error, and which is center around the manipulations or the exploitations of biodiversity, to a large degree still determines the land use dynamics in the mountains. So there is an emphasis on the diversification rather than the homogenizations of the landscape. So if we also looked at the various ways in which how these agroforestries are being practices, there is multiplicity of plant species which are being planted, and it does not believe in this idea of monocropping or homogenization. So such an approach actually ensure a sustainability of the fragile mountain landscape in the past. So it is today even more significant that in the context of the global change adaptation strategies, because diversifications will render many of these mountain societies to vulnerable to uncertainties arising from the global change, or you can actually say a climate change. So there are also people who goes on to say that whether climate change is real or not. So we have already discussed elsewhere, so I'm not going to come to that. Now our understanding of this traditional ecological knowledge is again based on economic, ecological and socio-cultural benefits, which are both tangible and intangible, that traditional societies may derive from their surrounding landscape. Now if you look at the economic aspects, traditional crop varieties which are being cultivated, the lesser known plants and animals of food value, and also medicinal plants are being harvested from the wild, which are of direct economic benefit for the mountain societies, and also can buffer periods of food scarcities, as I already pointed out. Now if you look at the social ecological aspect, the way in which how these mountain societies conserve and engage in manipulating biodiversity actually contributes towards ecosystems resilience, and also strengthens people's ability to cope with the environmental change, that is in conserving soil water regimes, and also hydrology, and also to manage the soil fertility through the enhancement of soil biological processes. Now if you look at the again socio-cultural aspect, that is the cultural, spiritual and religious dimensions of the mountain people are actually centered around the concept of, say, sacred species, sacred groves and also sacred landscapes, which can play an important role in biodiversity conservations. So for those of you who are not familiar with what sacred grove is, it is a forested land which does not rest which restricted even going there and then cutting felling of the trees, because there is a community belief, you can say mythology or whatever you want to. So there is a belief that a certain spirits actually dwell in those areas, or which is very much revered by those communities. So depending on geographical areas, regions, and then from community to community, there are different ways of perceiving the sacred groves. So some would say that it is pretty much it provides a social, religious, and cultural significance to a community concerned. So therefore it has to be remain untouched, and rather it has to be put in conserved as wilderness. So that sort of practices in some sense, for instance in the Northeast regions, with the Khasi community also have these practices of sacred groves, so which ultimately played actually an important role in the biodiversity conservations. Now again, if we are to look at the soil classification, that is to manage a soil fertility, is dependent again on the mechanistic understanding of the biological processes which are again the regulating the nutrient flux, the organic matter dynamics, and also the soil physical properties, and the sustainable management of soil fertility must be actually based on the ecosystems or landscape level understanding of processes, thereby integrating the soil management concerns of those who are the practitioner, that is the farmer. So his objectives and decisions in relations to all components of the agro ecosystems. Now one can also say that every species for that matters contribute to the way in which how these the ecosystems functions. For example, earthworm species are actually assumed to be an ecosystem engineers directly, and because they directly and indirectly control the availability of resources to other organisms by causing changes in the physical state of the biotic or abiotic materials. So at the very heart of this concept, actually what it tries to portray is that their ability to move through the soil and build an organomaterial structure as macro aggregates. So one can actually see that the presence of earthworms is not really being noticed when the exogenous mechanisms such as fertilizers or maybe chemicals are being used in farming and cropping processes. So one can actually see that because the use of these extensive chemicals and fertilizers have actually wiped out or root out many of these insects, for example earthworms and so forth. So there is a crave for the organic food or so and so, and earthworm actually caters to the soil fertility. So the traditional vermiculture technology that simply uses mostly the EPIC, that is the surface living earthworms or the garbage worms, to prepare compost from a high quality organic matter like animal dung or from an amendment waste biomass, is what we understood as the vermicomposting or off soil technology, as it is being done outside the system, that is the ex situ conditioned. So, this technology in some sense allows quick transformations of the high quality substrate into a mineral rich compost that could readily be used in the agriculture field. So, now how do we engage in redeveloping the shifting agriculture or zoom system, as we have already mentioned, that is to build up the traditional ecological knowledge systems. So, the traditional societies actually manipulate the subspecies and species leveled crop biodiversity in order to optimize production under a given ecological system, but at the same time also cope with a predictable and unpredictable environmental uncertainties, as we have under traditional agro ecosystems in the northeastern hills. So, associated biodiversity, that is the with biodiversity, rather than resorting to with controlled, as is often being done under modern agriculture, so as to conserve moisture and nutrients within the soiled ecosystems. So, moving on, the very knowledge system which is available with the local mountainous communities is that they tends to connect their social values with the ecological keystone values, was seen as the basis for designing strategies for redeveloping the shifting agriculture or zoomed, which of course is one of the predominant form of source of livelihood, mostly in the northeastern Himalayas. So, which of course has alter and change as pointed out. So, it also may be noted here that the local communities have time and again discouraged or rejected the textbook knowledge based models and also land use development, in spite of the fact that there is no viable alternative system which is available to them to replace the zoom system that is rapidly broken down. So, from an economic point of view, so this sort of agriculture practices might be can be considered or assumed to be unproductive, and from a social and cultural point of view, again mostly from the anthropological studies which are being done in the upland areas, have come to a conclusion that it is not simply an economic activity or economic practices, but these agriculture practices over time have actually becomes a way of life where the social, cultural, religious belief systems are being interwoven. So, it is difficult for them to really take the different part, even when they feel that there is not really a viable alternative to actually go on and then practice such systems for years and generations. So, traditional ecological knowledge, again combined with an appropriate water management, could actually be a major factor for a sustainable management of natural and human managed ecosystems, and was which is initially shown for the northeast and also subsequently demonstrated on a large scale for other parts of the Himalayas. So, some of the other important outputs which arises from the zoom redevelop initiatives are which is again from the extensive study which is being pointed out by the noted ecologist P.S. Ramakrishnan. So, a mixed tree plantations in the zoom plots were superior to the monocultures, which we always understood as the agroforestry. So, people were willing to go for some of the suggested non-traditional crops, and home garden systems prevalent in the regions were used as a window for a cash income crops, and communities were actually willing to view biodiversity management and a carbon sequestrant within the system as incidental outputs. So, sustainable management of ecosystems, textbook based approach or silvicultural knowledge has so far been the exclusive basis for forestry practices. However, in recent times, involving communities in forest management is being seen as more and more critical for the sustainable forestry. So, from the discussion so far, it follows that socially valued species have to be the basis for community participatory forest management if sustainability is to be ensured from the point of view of the forest dwellers. We actually need to be involved to address sustainability concerns, particularly when one realizes that these communities are actually dependent upon forests for a range of tangible and intangible benefit. So, in order to understand the linkages between the biophysical and social system, but also deals with the traditional knowledge, not simply as local knowledge, as often being studied by social anthropologists, but have evaluated the traditional ecological knowledge using appropriate scientific tools to arrive at conclusions that could be generalized across the socio-ecological systems. So, such an approach towards linking knowledge systems is pretty much critical for regional planning process, for conservation link sustainable mountain development. Now, if we try to link the or critically looked at subsistence economy, which is again based on the diversified resource use and indigenous knowledge. The very termed subsistence economy itself explains that the impoverished nature of their economy, which is again based on a consistent income from sources such as agriculture, the non-timber forest products, and also by engaging in selling of those medicinal plants for their cash income, so on and so forth. So, the availability of again the medicinal plants as part of their surrounding natural vegetations, and also the knowledge of these plants which are acquired traditionally help these people to collect, process, and also sometime trade in them. So, they actually obtain a substantial part of their income from the sale of say the medicinal plants and also the traditional medical treatment, because we have like the ethnomedicines, so on and so forth. So, the local knowledge of these medicinal herbs in the society has actually developed over a long period of time, and they were exposed to a variety of plants and herbs because of their infrequent movement between their summer. Now, how does these traditional institutions actually contribute or enhance to knowledge and thereby linking with sustainability? So, the Bhutia community which are in mostly concentrated in the eastern Himalayas have this knowledge or tries to these manifestations of their natural resources systems in terms of myriad opportunities and also constraints for communities survival. So, one of the peculiar or important features of this community is the functioning of a number of social groups to make certain decisions, that is with regards to sharing and utilizations of natural resources. So these community decisions in terms of sharing and utilizations of resources becomes important, because each community, each individual actually contribute to the pool of these resources, thereby the community concerns actually have been looking after these resources. So at some point earlier I have also discussed in the sections on common property versus the private property, by engaging upon the works of such as Gerrit Herdint, which talks about the tragedy of the commons. So if these such institutions are not actually controlling, or if there is no consensus among the members of the society with regards to sharing and utilizations of natural resources, it also the if the wasted individual interest overrides or goes against the collective interest, there is a possibility of how the resource depletions of resources can actually be the outcome. So therefore what is evident from the Bhutia society is that their community organizations, as such as the village council, that is the Gram Panchayat, the forest council, which is known as the Van Panchayat. They also have a Pani Panchayat, that is which looks after the water, and also the youth forum, the Yuva Dalt, and the women organizations, the Mahila Dalt, have actually pretty much successfully evolved the norms and practices to regulate individual as well as the collective behavior with regards to how they manage and maintain not only the natural resources but also their collective outlook or worldview towards nature. So these traditional institutions take decisions with regards to the regulations of resources, sharing and utilizations, and also maintenance of their resources like the forest, grazing land, and water springs. So water at some point in mostly in traditional societies are the gift of nature, but water today actually has become a commodity, and it is being commodified. So at some point many of these spring waters are actually being commodified by selling off to the nearby towns and cities through loads of tankers and various others. So forests also can actually be commodified when it is being used only for a market oriented income, and so on and so forth. And also the grazing lands which Gerrit Herdint in his essay The Tragedy of the Commons have extensively given an explanations or elaborate this in detail, so I am not going into that. So these traditional institutions which we have pointed out, which caters to looking after or trying to put on certain kinds of rules and regulations with regards of maintaining their resources such as forests, water, so on and so forth. So these traditional institutions which are being created traditionally by the community concerns are still functional to a great extent, and which are also again respected by the community concerned. So their decisions are also being regarded and obeyed, and also has a social binding. So the evolutions of such institutions in this society in some sense is an indication of their traditional vision, that is to respond appropriately to their biophysical circumstances. So the traditional institutions of the Bhutia community which we have discussed so far have actually built up their basic practices which are based on proximity and also the functional knowledge of the resource use, and hence have a strong sense of their knowledge system with regards to the conservation ingrained in their traditions. So we could actually see the way in which how the knowledge systems is being embodied in their traditions and cultures, which have been successively performed and carried forward for generations. Now, if we discuss further, I mean, what we have discussed so far is also concerning the Himalayan environment. These are some of the facts and figures. So the Himalayan environment, if you take into account of late, there is a the man-made induced activities have actually in recent times accelerated the ecological degradations, and as a consequence of which threaten the equilibrium of the Himalayan mountain ecosystems, which are also stated as unplanned and land use. So, if in recent times we could actually see that there is a man-made induced activities mostly in the Himalayan landscapes, which have actually accelerated the ecological degradations, and thereby which stands threatened the equilibrium or the ecological balance systems of the Himalayan mountain ecosystem, as a consequence of which the mountains areas are being threatened because of the man-made. Some of these man-made activities are the unplanned land use, cultivations on the steep slopes, overgrazing, and major engineering activities such as building of roads, dams, so on and so forth, and also over exploitations of village or the community forest, lopping and broadleaf plant species, and extensive or the shifting cultivations in some sense has become more of a permanent, and which is a short cycled. So normally shifting cultivations has a longer durations of cycled, which where a land is being kept fallow for 8 to 10 years, and then the cycle of this fallow again is being reduced. Thereby it also cause enormous problems to the ecosystems, mostly as is prevalent and practiced in Northeast India. And also the inroads of the tourism industry and recreations have impacted on the biodiversity to a large extent. So no doubt of late there has been a reframing or reconstituting the idea of tourism by adding eco, that is ecotourism, where the tourists actually have to act very responsibly in terms of not just littering or harming the environment, but just merely as appreciating nature. So the practice of these monocultures in forest, that is by planting only a particular variety of plants, which actually is very industrial oriented, eucalyptus or maybe the pine or so and so forth, as you all know. So which again alter the biodiversity of the mountainous landscape. Erosions, landslides have actually resulted in 1/3 of the total Himalayan land area, which is becoming environmentally derelict. So man is again, after all, an important factor for creating change in most of the world's mountain ecosystems. For centuries, highlanders have lived in partnership or pretty much sharing an intricate relationship and equilibrium with nature, creating some of the planet's most harmonious landscape. So over the years, man's impact on the Himalayan mountain ecosystem is again producing critical situations at a very faster rate than most other types of ecosystems. So, man-induced activities in the Himalayas, such as unplanned use, so and so forth, which I have already talked about, and cultivation steep slope, overgrazing in natural grassland, major engineering activities such as road construction, mining, dams, so and so forth. So, these are some of the problems which again is causing a lot of problems, and which have actually accelerated ecological degradations and also threaten the equilibrium of the mountain ecosystem. Now, about 1/3 of the land in the Himalayan region again may be considered environmentally derelict land due to poor land maintenance practices, which altered agricultural practices and also over intensive land use. So, beside this derelict land, many remaining lands are again highly susceptible to erosion and also landslides. So, the other factors which are again responsible for, such as deteriorations of the soil properties, are the short cycle shifting cultivations, which I have already pointed out, and monoculture in place of mixed forest. So, the mixed forest again is pretty much enhanced to the equilibrium of the ecosystem, and also the ruthless destructions of the native plant species and also overgrazing. So, the destructions of native plant species will invite again the foreign species, and thereby which also create a problem of the weed problems, which actually cause or invade the native species. So, the soiled vast areas of the Himalayas are now nutrient deficient and also may ultimately result in desertification. Well, as we had discussed some of the environmental problems which are being encountered in the Himalayan problems, and also engage with trying to look at some of the impending issues. For instance, in the Himalayan regions, the mostly they belong to the herding community, and most of the herds are no doubt being privately owned. However, the pastures land, as we all know, is a common property. So, therefore, the private livestock holder has little interest in adapting, meaning reducing the number of his livestock, because it as there is a tendency of multiplying more and more. That's the tendency of human nature in that sense. So, number of his livestock to the pastures carrying capacity, because he would be economically inferior to others stockholders. So, that tendency of being engaged in competitions among individuals in some sense has posed a lot of threat to the carrying capacity of the common property lands, or in other words the grazing lands. So, these traditions of grazing has actually reduced the quality and quantity of the available fodder in the environment or the natural surroundings, as therefore it interrupts the natural vegetations of plants and also decrease the productivity of the fields carrying capacity or pasture capacity, and finally and eventually it results to the deteriorations of the soil. So, microclimatic changes due to the clear felling of native plant species and also the constructions of various infrastructures, development projects, so and so forth, has actually posed a threat to the Himalayan regions. Now, coming to how this biodiversity is being conserved across different ethnic communities, and which are actually how ecology is being connected through their social and cultural relationship. So for that we would want to look at what sacred groves is. I'm sure many of you must be familiar with it. Now sacred grove, as we all know, is a tract of or a virgin forest which sort of harbor a multi-species of trees or plants that is which has a rich biodiversity and are being protected by the concerned local communities to keep them in a relatively undisturbed state. And sacred groves are again conserved on the basis of religion, that is faith and belief in the community. So various studies has comes to give or define this particular term as sacred groves are small patches of forest or natural vegetation dedicated by the local communities to the ancient spirit and ancestral spirit or deities and have a traditional means of biodiversity. So various indigenous communities dedicate sacred groves to the local deities or ancestral spirits, as we had pointed out. So such a grove may consist of multi-species, multi-tier primary forest, or a cluster of trees depending on the history of the vegetations. So these groves were best protected by the local communities, usually through customary taboos and sanctions with cultural and also ecological implications, which are a traditional way of in situ conservations of biodiversity. So the prevalence of sacred groves is being witnessed almost in the Himalayan regions and also in some parts of the central India and also in states like Kerala, so on and so forth. So how does this sacred grove has its origin? Now from the studies made by Guild et al. And Hajra, they come to sort of a findings and a conclusion that the belief that shifting cultivations could be one of the reasons for creations of sacred groves. So when we in-depthly looked at the very presence or the practice of shifting cultivations, there is an enormous practice of agro-biodiversity where patches of land might be clear, but then at the same time there are trees or vegetations which are being preserved or conserved rather. And then sacred groves might have also originated as a result of the its utilitarian nature, and social institutions or as a part of a taboo that evolved historically over several generations to provide a site for culturally crucial and also social interactions. So the environment of sacred grove, as pointed out by few other studies, mention that sacred groves again represent an ancient Indian conservation traditions, again protected by a lot of reverence and respect, fear and sentiments. So therefore it is very much being embedded in the social and cultural norms and values of that concerned particular community. So sacred groves are again the repositories of rare and endemic species, owing to that maintaining the untouched from human exposure or activities. So this provides an inextricable linkage between present society to the past in terms of biodiversity, culture, religious and also ethnic heritage. So its communities might have again a different version or their own stories behind this. Now the ecological significance of sacred grove sort of maintains that it tries to address the issues such as conservations of biodiversity, soil conservations and fertility, climate regions regulations, and also of the local hydrology, and also maintenance of nutrients cycles, and provides an aesthetic beauty to the landscape, and also as a consequence of which the sacred groves avoids deforestations and also degradations of forest covered. Now, some of the biological significance of sacred groves can be categorized as follows. They are actually composed of several floras, which are again rich in the medicinal values, because there are a lot of medicinal plants which are rare plants and endemic are actually being available. So timber and fuel wood yielding plants are also being witnessed and available, and ethnobotanically these areas remains unexplored, it is untouched and more or less virgin, and no comprehensive account of local tradition is available. So their plants usually in sacred groves are wealth and also conservation potential were impressive enough to acknowledge as mini biosphere reserves. Now, of late, one can also find that through the existing literatures that there are enormous threats and concerning to the sustainability of these sacred groves. So, a sustainable system with a limited resource used by the indigenous societies, and indigenous societies with traditional beliefs and cultures, small populations, and also a limited demand for plants, and well preserved sacred grove perpetuations, and an unsustainable system due to excessive resource use by modern societies, and for instance, the sacred grove cases in Meghalaya, if you look at, which is very much practiced by the Khasi community. Of late, due to the changes, not just in terms of the contours of faith, that is by abandoning many of their animistic belief systems or animistic religions, they have converted to Christian religion, and also most importantly, many of these practices are actually being abandoned, and which are actually being discouraged, and people have actually moved from their rural landscape or to a much more urbanized and shifting to those nearby towns and cities, have actually cut off themselves and also abandoned many of these practices. So one could actually see the transformations of landscape as well, where people are more impacted by a market driven economy. At the same time, their belief and then the socio-cultural practices have evolved, which might have eventually pose a threat, and also the questions of sustainability of sacred groves is being under threat. Now, the management and conservations, if you look at the very faith in sacredness, should also connect with the ecological knowledge. So this is a suggestions or more or less a way forward in terms of looking at sacred groves vis-a-vis biodiversity conservations and also various other forms of knowledge systems which in some sense could cater to the questions of sustainability and sustainable development. So to declare sacred groves as heritage sites and also provide financial support for management. So this could actually come from the external factors which the interventions of extraneous factors could in some way enhance and enable this. So also to engage in resurvey of sacred groves and also recover the encroached areas, conservations of intact groves and restorations of degraded ones. So awareness should be organized for the local people, that is the concerned people who at this point might have distanced themselves from such kind of practices. So a buffer joined between the sacred grove and the surroundings to check anthropogenic disturbances. So these are some of the way in which how management and conservations can be linked with. So how then one should engage in conservations of these biological resources. So the endemic and threatened plant species should be conserved, and that is the medicinal plants diversity should be given utmost importance and then conserved. And also to add the sustainable goals, that is to protected areas network to ensure the protection of habitats, and also convert the traditional belief into an effective conservational strategy. So the scientific basis and conservational values, and also reduce anthropogenic pressure on the sacred grove, and the ecological studies on the threatened species. So over the years, what we have seen mostly in the Himalayan areas, whether it's the central Himalayas, the western Himalayas, or the northeast Himalayas, that there is a pretty much transformation, most important in landscape, and which also in some way caters to the changes in overall geographical transformations. So the beautiful scenic landscapes have been transformed due to large scale engineering activities in certain environmentally sensitive areas, and deforestations and continuing use of the mountain slopes have actually resulted in landslide and very evident in the northwestern Himalayas. So changes in for example the river course has actually resulted to like the flash floods due to the poor vegetation's cover and also low infiltration rates, and also modify perennial water resources and also change surface and groundwater hydrology to create problems throughout the Himalayas. So the natural springs are actually drying up due to drastic disturbance in the aquifer, partially affected by the indiscriminate lopping of native broadleaf trees, species like oak and also alnus. These changes in the mountain areas have had effects on the downstream areas, especially those who are living in the low-lying and the plain areas. So annual flood also cause great damage, and also the rate of sedimentations has increased tremendously, and during and immediately after the monsoon season. This has also increased the chance of the reeds are used for irrigations drying up in the months without rainfall. So if you look at the biological aspect, that is the Himalayan ecosystem, which have a high biological diversity and also rich genetic resources, are more fragile because they have a low intrinsic resilience, and continued human interference has resulted in the partially collapse of the system, and a clear failing in the Himalayas has resulted in the poor recycling of nutrients. So the settled agriculture, that is shifting cultivation, mainly practiced in the northeast Himalayas, expansions of agricultural land due to population pressures, and also forest exploitations for fuel, fodder, and other major engineering activities like dam and hydroelectric projects are also in some sense responsible for the decline of forest covered. And excessive deforestation and also overuse of the mountain slopes has caused massive erosion, landslides, decreasing agriculture yields, and increasing poverty. So therefore, this can be linked to a deteriorating biological, physical, and also the socio-economic environment. So the constructions of roads, dams, reservoirs, and mining, and also hydroelectric projects, together with illegal poachings, have a considerable impact. Now, if you quickly have a look at or have a glance of these central Himalayan areas, which is perhaps based on the studies conducted by Rao et al. In the Garhwal region, have in some sense tries to look at the traditional ecological knowledge that is linked with the biodiversity, natural and human management. So various possibilities for sustainable management of natural resources which concern with the sustainable livelihood of local communities have been deliberate upon. So depletions of forest covered, biodiversity and terrestrial carbon stock, and also the declining farm productivity and increasing hydrological imbalance and soil erosion are interconnected problems, and the root causes of the poor economy of the hill people concerned, and eventually threatened global environmental benefits from the Himalayas. And from the study, it is also evident that the indigenous knowledge is an integral dimension of all societies, but is more intact in areas such as the high altitude Himalayan villages, where inaccessibility and isolations have acted as barriers to outside forces for a long period of time. So some aspects of indigenous knowledge based resource use of management practices and change therein, and on the scope for integrating indigenous and conventional ideological science for resolving the biodiversity or environmental conservation development conflicts within the context of the Himalayan mountain system. So if you look at the forest biodiversity and the impacts of interventions, so traditional social cultural mechanisms of fostering systematic and also regulated use of these wild plants resources seems to have evolved as a necessary to optimize economic outputs from domesticated biodiversity. So all across the regions, traditional management systems are characterized by practice favoring a balance in utilizations and regenerations of the natural resource base, equity and social integrity to achieve the ultimate goal of sustainable livelihood within a small scale subsistence economies in highly isolated and inaccessible mountain settlements. So conventional approach to conservation, that is the establishment of wildlife sanctuaries and national parks, have assumed traditional practices to be detrimental to conservation of wild biodiversity and the functioning of ecosystem. Now in the traditional system, there was no restrictions of the collections of wild edibles, dead wood and also various other things, partly because these resources were abundant. However, the grazing and utilizations of forest products such as medicinal plants and bamboos, raw materials for handicraft, used to be undertaken in groups during periods fixed by the consensus, that is the communities take collective decisions to reduce the risk of overexploitation by individuals. So in some sense, the community themselves have actually managed the resources with a collective decisions. So traditions such as the social sanctions to market forest resource-based handicraft, medicinal plants and nomadic grazing only by small holders and landless people foster equity to a significant extent. So policy driven changes, the utilizations of forest resources for national industrial development and environmental conservation was introduced as policy goals, which is distinct from those related to people forest relationships. So the majority of village common lands were taken over by the government and notified as forest as the law of the land actually, and various policies keep evolving, and the forest policy is one of them. So at present, what the government forest lands can be actually stratified into, national parks and then also wildlife sanctuaries, and where traditional wildlife hunting is again being restricted. That is, access and use of resources are being, restricted with the changes of law. And also reserve forests where, concession to local communities are more liberal in some sense compared to with the earlier two areas. So community forests whose management is entrusted to local institutions such as the forest council, or through the traditional village headman or gamburas, and village institutions are again authorized to decide only on subsistence needs, and government approval to the extractions and use are actually have to be share benefits from any commercial extraction with the government. So traditionally medicinal plants which are collected was a subsidy activity and so on and so forth. And traditional agriculture also has undergone to a large the prominent changes in the recent past in many sections of the Himalayas, though there is no perceptible change in cropping intensity, the area under agriculture and crop diversity and husbandry practices have changed. So we can in some sense sum up by with these observations that several plants and animals, no doubts, that are threatened in the forests are still well conserved in some of the sacred areas, as we have pointed out. It has also been observed that several medicinal plants that are not to be found in the forest are abundant in sacred groves. So further rare, endangered, threatened and endemic species are often concentrated in sacred groves. So the sacredness, religious beliefs and taboos play a significant role in promoting sustainable utilizations and conservations of flora and fauna of the region. However, with the passage of time, considerable changes have taken place in the extent of the sacred groves, or maybe in terms of managing resources, as we have discussed, in their vegetation structure, people's perceptions towards them, causing the frequent degradations of these mini biosphere reserves. So these are some of the references which you might like to refer for further enhancing your understanding. So in the upcoming classes, we will be looking at the how traditional religions has in some sense been able to engage upon the biodiversity conservations vis-a-vis sustainability by taking a case study which I myself have conducted. So please refer and then stay tuned. Thank you.